people know anything about cryptocurrency, they know that it's quite volatile, and that makes it very hard for it to be used as a medium of exchange, meaning you can use it to buy and sell goods and services.
I do want to ask one question,
Yeah.
because there's been talk in North Carolina with the state treasurer about investing pension dollars into cryptocurrency up to 5%. What do we think about that?
Diversification into different kinds of assets is a smart thing to do.
I think it's just an awful idea. I really do. I mean,
Welcome on in to Tying It Together with Tim Boehm. I am Tim Boehm, here with John McHugh, as always, producer. John, if I said cryptocurrency to you, what do you think?
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin?
And beyond that, it's just a fog.
Yeah.
I know nothing.
I have to admit, this episode is a little bit of like crypto for dummies.
Which I needed it.
Yeah, boy, these guys are smart.
Yeah.
So crypto's been in the news a ton. Congress just passed a bill. If you read about investments or whatever, Bitcoin, you hear about things nonstop. But I think a lot of us, John, I don't think I'm wrong, I think a good chunk of America probably has heard about it but doesn't really know even what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a nebulous idea on the surface level where, if you don't, it's not something that the more you hear about it, the more you're going to understand it. You really need to look into it to understand it. And I don't know if there's two better people to explain it than the people.
But I'll tell you what, I
here.
still walk away with so many questions about it, even after hearing them talk about it so well. All right, so here's who's joining us, and I'm going to try to make sure I get this right because they got fancy titles too. Jimmy Lenz is a Duke University director of the Master of Engineering in Financial Technology and Master of Engineering in Cybersecurity at Duke University. He was an early adopter of digital trading and spent a lot of time in the private sector too. Lee Reiner is a lecturing fellow at Duke University and Duke Law. He's known for his analysis on cryptocurrency regulation. They have both testified before Congress on this very issue. He's got a long industry background in the financial industry as well. They also co-host their own podcast called Coffee and Crypto with Lee and Jimmy. And John, I think you'll know why they own their own podcast and do it, because they're really great together.
Yeah, they're great together, and they can explain things really well in sometimes pretty complicated, but you'll see other times it makes sense where stuff that didn't make sense before does now.
Yeah, it sort of opens up the mind a little bit to the idea of it. And they disagree a lot, and they're fun about it. So let's get right to Jimmy and Lee. Guys, first of all, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Part of the reason I want to do this is because I'm not very smart when it comes to this, and I know there's probably a lot of other people out there that are hearing what's going on in Congress and are like, what the heck is going on? So, Jimmy, let's start with the pure basic. What is cryptocurrency?
What is cryptocurrency? Boy, that's the question of the ages, isn't it? In particular right now. So cryptocurrency is, we can think about it in a couple of different ways. And it's basically electronic money or electronic stores of value. When we say money, usually people think of fiat currency, US dollars or something like that. But cryptocurrency is borderless. It is not a fiat. It's not issued by a government or something like that, at least not up until now. Maybe we'll have a central bank digital currency, but for now, that's not going to happen, in particular here in the U.S. But it's an electronic store of value. So think about the way that we do almost everything now is electronic, right? If I asked you to pull out your wallet, I bet there's no cash in it. If you're even carrying a wallet, right? You do everything on your phone. And so when we think about cryptocurrency, that's all it is a store of value similar to currency, but it's denominated in different things.
And who holds this currency?
Who holds the currency? Well, you mean who is the currency issued by?
Yeah.
So it can be issued by all kinds of different entities. My students actually make a cryptocurrency. They make a store of value on the Ethereum blockchain as part of their course. So it's very, very simple to do. But recently we're hearing about stable coins and things like that. And those are being issued by large companies for the most part. And those are backed by other kinds of assets. And so we're seeing different sorts of entities issue these. And for the most part, they're larger companies that can, for lack of a better term, be categorized as a financial services company.
And so, Lee, how has this evolved over time? And and just like AI, are things exponentially changing?
Well, things are changing quickly. I wouldn't go so far as to say exponentially. I mean, I think, with AI, it's the sort of the underlying technology, the models, the computing power involved. That's what's really growing. I think when you look at the growth in the crypto industry, it's primarily amongst users. So people who are investing are using cryptocurrency for various reasons. And I think more recently you've seen the growth on the issuer side. So the number of different entities who are issuing some form of cryptocurrency. I mean, Jimmy and I have our own podcast every week. Shameless plug here, Coffee and Crypto, with Lee and Jimmy. And for the past year or so, every week we're talking about a new company who plans on issuing a stable coin. And stable coins are a form of cryptocurrency that are designed to maintain a stable peg to the US dollar. Typically, that's one for one. So that's where you're really seeing the growth. But I mean, the growth in crypto is not necessarily coming from the technology side.
So, Jimmy, so we already talked about several things: stablecoin, there's Bitcoin, all these other things, and these issuers. But it's not really. Is that like having all these different foreign currencies?
I would say when we're talking about stable coins in particular, I would analogize them to money market funds. Because they look a lot like money market funds. They're invested in very, very similar assets. As Lee said, they're pegged to the dollar like a money market fund. And so I think that's the best way to think about stable coins. You think about stable coins, think about them in terms of like a money market fund, except that they're much more efficient. Everything that you do is immediate. And they can be easily transferred. They can be, whereas your money market fund is going to be, you're going to buy it and sell it through a brokerage firm. It's going to take you a couple of days. It does maintain a peg to the U.S. dollar, but you certainly can't use it for other things. I can't use my money market fund at Schwab to go in and buy a cup of coffee, whereas a stablecoin I can.
So, Lee, to that point, I was going to ask: Is this more about investment and money management long run than it is about a currency to use for goods?
Well, I think you have to kind of bifurcate the crypto market across sort of unbacked cryptocurrencies. So if you think of like the original cryptocurrency, which is like Bitcoin, I think that's what most people think of. And you separate that from the stable coins, as Jimmy has just alluded to, because stable coins were really designed to kind of counteract Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies like it fundamental weakness, which is its volatility. I mean, I think to the extent, people know anything about cryptocurrency, they know that it's quite volatile, and that makes it very hard for it to be used as a medium of exchange, meaning you can use it to buy and sell goods and services because, if you were a merchant, why would you accept payment in something that could go down, 10% in a day because of a Elon Musk tweet or something like that, right? So, out of that emerged stable coins, which, have all the technical properties or most of the technical properties of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ether, but have that stabilization mechanism, meaning they hold a basket of traditional assets in reserve to maintain that one-for-one peg. So, those are clearly, as I said, designed to be used for payments, meaning stable coins. At this point, when you look at, the original cryptocurrency, Bitcoin and others like it, it's primarily an investment, right? That's kind of how the market has sort of coalesced at this point. There's been all sorts of products that have been developed to allow investors access to the economics of Bitcoin without having to actually hold their own Bitcoin. And it's a bit complicated, but kind of back to your original question, Tim, like what is this stuff? I mean, at its core, it's simply just a database entry. Right? A Bitcoin is an entry on a distributed database, meaning that everyone who, runs the Bitcoin software on their computer has access to the exact same database, and everyone agrees on sort of the canonical state of that database. And it's kind of, sort of anodyne as that sounds, it's actually an incredible technological achievement because prior to like Bitcoin, you couldn't achieve digital scarcity, meaning I could send you a spreadsheet. And I could tell you, look, this is the only copy of the spreadsheet in the known universe, right? But you have no way to verify if that's true. Technologically speaking, I could clearly, copy that spreadsheet, send it to other people. So therefore, it wouldn't be a very good, investment or medium of exchange, right? Because you couldn't, verify that it was sort of the only one. Bitcoin and its creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, who we still don't know who he, she, they are, sort of combine existing technologies with incentive mechanisms to sort of kick out all the intermediaries and allow everyone to agree on the canonical state of this database, which prevents what they call the double spend problem, meaning that you can't spend, a cryptocurrency that you don't have, or you can't spend the same cryptocurrency twice, right? So that's really the innovation there. Now, Satoshi, if you go back and read his white paper from Halloween 2008, which is sort of what launched this whole cryptocurrency era, he clearly envisioned Bitcoin as a payment mechanism. He talked a lot about that. He talked about, there's a lot of problems with our existing payments infrastructure. Mainly, we have to rely on trusted intermediaries, third parties to sort of verify everything. And that comes with a cost, right? I mean, these third parties are not just, intermediating these transactions out of the goodness of their heart, right? They're extracting fees. And so that was his vision. But as I said, it just became far too volatile to be used as a payment mechanism. And so now essentially it's just an investment. And Jimmy and I have differences of opinion on the quality of that investment. Look, my point is that it has no fundamental value. It doesn't come with any, cash flows. It doesn't come with any economic rights. And so in essence, it's valuable because people who hold it think that they can sell it to someone else at a higher price in the future. And I just don't think that's sustainable long term. But obviously, many people in the crypto industry disagree with me.
I disagree vehemently with him, which is what we talk about on our podcast all the time. The one thing that Lee didn't bring up is the programmability of a lot of the cryptocurrencies. So cryptocurrencies where $1 is $1. I can give you $1, but I can't say, okay, I'm going to give you part of this dollar now and part of this dollar when something is achieved, right? It won't happen automatically. You have to trust that I'll do that. Whereas in cryptocurrency, there is a feature of programmability where you can basically say, hey, if this certain event takes place, you will automatically get paid. And we can't go in and alter that. It's set when we agree on this, when we both kind of sign off on it. The contract, smart contracts you hear about, that's what these smart contracts are. And so those kinds of features that are built in, I think, are a big differentiator too. Different cryptocurrencies have different functions and they allow for different things. And that's part of the value that is implicit in different cryptocurrencies, this ability to program in different ways. And then as you start doing more of that, you have to look at the chain or the network that these cryptocurrencies live on. Cryptocurrencies typically are not portable. You can't take them from one chain to another chain to another chain. They have a certain native chain that they use. And so when you pay a fee, when you use that network, you do have to pay a small fee usually, and that fee is going to be in the currency of the realm. And so that's where some of the value is derived, the fact that if I want to do a certain kind of transaction, I have to do it in this currency. And I'm probably mining, and there are economics around the mining of different kinds of cryptocurrencies that also kind of imbue this value.
How does it increase in value? Because if it's an investment, right?
It is an investment. Well, if more people are using the network and there is a finite amount of currency, as the demand for the network grows, and because there is a finite amount of currency, the currency has to be worth more. And so, we've done a lot of experiments around this. I do this with my students quite often. And it is really around the strength and the size of the network that you can derive a certain value from. So as the network becomes, as you have more users, as you have more transactions, as you have more complicated transactions, of course, the currency has to go up in value if you keep it at a kind of a steady state.
So Lee, let's say I wanted to invest like this to help my retirement. How does that work? Like, do you cash this out and it becomes dollars, or how does that, or do you, because you don't buy goods and services with this, how does that work?
Well, yeah, I mean, essentially at the end of the day, I mean, unless, in the future when we all retire, sort of we're paying for goods and services in crypto, which I think is highly unlikely. I mean, you're going to have to cash out. And frankly, that's not, really hard. I mean, there are a number of cryptocurrency exchanges where you can, buy and sell various cryptocurrencies with US dollars. And beyond that, I mean, you actually don't need, as I mentioned earlier, you don't actually need to hold crypto if you don't want to, and you can still gain exposure to the economics of crypto. So the classic example is ETFs, exchange traded funds, which I think most people who invest for retirement are probably familiar with. These are very popular products. They're very effective products because they allow for passive index investing at very low cost. And so now we've seen, the emergence of a number of different cryptocurrency ETFs, starting with the Bitcoin ETF, and BlackRock, which is a very well-known name in the world of finance, the largest ETF issuer in the world, or sponsor in the world. They have a Bitcoin ETF that became the fastest growing ETF in the history of the product. And you just, you can buy that through your retail brokerage account. So if you have a Schwab account or an E-Trade account or whatever it may be, you can buy a Bitcoin ETF with cash. So you never actually have to deal with cryptocurrency. Now we've seen the emergence of these, so-called Bitcoin treasury companies. So these are companies that are already publicly traded. Ostensibly, they have some core business that's not crypto related, but the company will go out and raise debt and equity and then invest those proceeds into cryptocurrency. So the classic example here is this company called Strategy. It used to be known as MicroStrategy. It was a software company who a few years ago just decided to go all in on Bitcoin, raise all this money from outside investors and buy Bitcoin. And now the stock market essentially values that company's strategy at twice the value of the underlying Bitcoin that the company holds. Now, Jimmy and I talk about this on our podcast as well. And we both agree that this is not sustainable. But I just bring that up as an example of how companies or how investors can gain exposure through just buying, stock in a publicly traded company that is just invested in Bitcoin. So again, that's just all dollar-based transactions. So it's actually quite simple at this point to invest in cryptocurrencies, with dollars. And, obviously when you sell, you get dollars back.
So, Jimmy, do you think this impacts how people invest in the market and its growth then, if people invest more in crypto?
Absolutely, we're seeing that. I mean, as Lee mentioned, when the ETF came out, when the Bitcoin ETF came out, it just exploded. And there were, by the way, 10 firms that were approved on the same day to issue these ETFs. So the fact that all 10 are still out there, they haven't merged or anything like that, gives you an idea of how much interest there is. But, going beyond that, we've seen other ETFs come out for other cryptocurrencies. The BlackRock also has basically a money market fund that is tokenized, so it looks kind of like an ETF. We're seeing more and more different kinds of assets being tokenized. JP Morgan, probably 3 weeks ago, announced they were tokenizing deposit accounts. And so you're probably saying, well, but why? Why tokenize these things? I can just go use a deposit account. Well, there are a few reasons. One is, as I said, access. You can access this 24/7. There are no shutdowns, there are no downtimes. The other thing is you can actually access your funds right away. So even if you go to a bank and deposit cash that's held for a certain period of time, you can't get access right away. If you deposit a check or if you're a small merchant using credit cards, it could take you a few days, a week before you actually get access to that. Well, take payment in stablecoins, you have access immediately. And I've heard, anecdotally somewhat, but that you are starting to see more and more small businesses accept stablecoins for payment because of this access.
So I was going to ask, do you agree with Lee, though, that it's unlikely, at least in the near future, that it will be used for goods and services?
No, I don't agree with Lee.
I said that regards to like Bitcoin. I didn't say that.
Yeah.
I exempted stablecoins.
Stablecoins.
Yeah. Although I disagree. I also agree that stablecoins will not be used widely for at least retail payments.
I think we're already seeing that they are. But the other thing that we're seeing is, and this has been around a while, is debit cards against your cryptocurrency. So there are several issuers, Visa and MasterCard type debit cards that you can use against your cryptocurrency account. So when you say, "Oh, I can't use it to buy a cup of coffee," it's like I do that every morning. I just debit my account, and so you are starting to see more and more. I think as these become more popular, as you see more banks start issuing them, things like that, there are going to be incentives to use these. Absolutely. I mean, you have to agree with me, Lee. There's going to be incentives for people to use stablecoins that are issued by banks, right?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, I don't really know what incentive the bank can provide. I think the big question is what happens if you have large retailers issue a stablecoin. So Walmart and Amazon have both recently said that they're considering launching a stablecoin. And so you can imagine a situation where, let's just say, you're shopping on Amazon and you have a certain amount of Amazon stablecoins that you would get a discount, for instance, if you use the Amazon stablecoin as opposed to like your credit card. I think that is certainly the easiest way to drive mass retail adoption. But again, these stablecoins are not interchangeable, right? So, I wouldn't be able to use the Amazon stablecoin, at Walmart or somewhere else like that.
Well, maybe you
But the,
could. Maybe you could. Yeah,
well, there
they
would
might
have to be,
accept it. They might
I don't
accept it.
know.
I mean,
Well, they're
it's,
competitors. So,
well, they're
you
competitors,
could
but
have
still.
interoperability. But
Yeah,
again, these things are not, they're not fungible like dollars.
right.
Stablecoins are. I mean, that's an important point to make. And also, Tim, consumer purchasing behavior is very, very sticky. And the reality is that most of us are very addicted to our credit card points, right? We all want our miles, our cash back, whatever it may be. And as a case in point, JP Morgan, which issues the popular Chase Sapphire Reserve card, just announced that they were going to raise the annual fee on that card to $795. Okay. So people are paying almost $800 just to use a credit card. Why would they switch then to using a stable coin that pays them no interest, right? And that's a key point to make because,
So,
President
yeah,
Trump just signed a bill into law that doesn't allow stable coins to pay interest. So look, I think there's a lot of reason why retailers, why merchants would want people to start using stable coins because as you've probably heard, right, they do not like the swipe fees that they have to pay. They are quite high. But the swipe fees, it's not something that the consumer is aware of, frankly, or necessarily cares all that much about. So consumers are what is going to drive the change here. And right now, I'm just not seeing it. I think there's reasons for corporate customers to use stablecoins on a business-to-business transaction basis, but from a retail standpoint, we're all kind of locked into our cards, and I just don't see that changing anytime soon.
Well, yeah, but you could give the same incentives as you have on cards, right? You could give discounts on different things, just like cards do. You can't pay interest out, but you can give discounts on under the new bill. So that would allow a bank to say, "Hey, use my stablecoin. I attract deposits because of that." We're not sure if they're going to be treated as Tier 1 or Tier 2 capital, but that's another story. But they could say, "Hey, if you shop at certain retailers or if you use my stablecoin, I'll give you 0.5% or 1% or 1.5% if you're a really good customer discount on things." So they can certainly incentivize behavior similar to what they've done in credit cards with stablecoins.
I want to ask about, because obviously that's a big elephant in the room, regulation and Congress and what this might look like in the future. But I do want to ask one question, because there's been talk in North Carolina with the state treasurer about investing pension dollars into cryptocurrency up to 5%. What do we think about that?
It's a diversified portfolio. I mean, I'm a fan of diversified portfolios. I'm an economist at heart, and that's kind of what I've always done. And I think that diversification into different kinds of assets is a smart thing to do. Lee's going to disagree with me on this, but I think it's a good idea that you should think about diversifying into all kinds of different kinds of assets. And we've seen over time that always works out better. Rather than putting all your eggs. Would I think we should put 95%? Absolutely not. But 5%? Absolutely. Why not?
Lee?
Well, as Jimmy and I always say, nothing we say should be construed as investment advice. So with that caveat aside, I think it's just an awful idea. I really do. I mean, how would people feel if the treasurer said we should, invest 10% of pension assets in Powerball tickets, right? I mean, it's just absurd that you would put teachers, firefighters, police officers, retirement savings at risk like this. Now, if people want to invest in crypto on their own, go ahead. If you're willing and able to take some risk and suffer the potential losses, then by all means, go for it. But I think, look, a lot of these pension funds, of course, are underfunded or have unfunded mandates, and I think there's a desire to kind of reach for yield, as they say, right? To kind of take big bets to close that gap. I just think it's a horrible idea, and it just like I said, risk retirement savings for too many people. So. Look, it's a legitimate asset in the sense that it's been around for a long time. Obviously as I said, it's been volatile, but it's, recently all-time highs. So I'm not saying, people shouldn't do it. But I think it's just too much risk to be in pension portfolios.
Part of the reason I want to bring you guys on is because it's coming up more and more. Congress just dealt with something on this. So from a regulatory perspective, and we can bring up what just happened in Congress, where are we on this?
Where are we on this? Well, we have a Congress that is moving, and it should be noted that this had more bipartisan support than I'm guessing any major bill in the last decade. So it's not like there were a handful of people that crossed the aisle. There were over 100 Democrats that voted for this, which I think is very notable. So you're seeing both sides of the aisle saying, yeah, we need to move forward. I really applaud the House Financial Services Committee and the Senate for moving this ahead. It's moved fairly quickly, but there's still more on the horizon. There is more coming, but they are moving ahead. And so I think even though I'm not a huge fan of regulation, I am a fan of, if you're going to do something, do it with rules that are written rather than by enforcement like the last SEC administration that we saw. I mean, I think that puts it a very fair playing field. And hey, we're already seeing the results of it. Lee and I both have testified in front of Congress on this subject, sometimes not directly, but indirectly. And I mentioned when I was there that, one thing that we don't want to do is stifle innovation. Americans are known for being just incredibly innovative, but also risk takers. That's what we do. And we're really good at it. And the last thing we want to do is to temper that in any way. One of the really cool things that I think that we're seeing is, even while this was still being talked about, but we saw it was on the horizon, it was going to pass in some form or another, you had different companies, financial services companies, lining up to say, hey, we're going to launch this. If this comes to pass, we are moving ahead. We are going to do some new things here. I think that's huge. I think that's what we are. That's who Americans are. And so I see that, people are looking towards the regulators for some direction. Now that direction is being given, we're seeing what's happened on the innovation front.
So Lee, Tim, just to add some context to that, I mean, the crypto industry has long wanted essentially two things out of Congress, and they've recently made some significant momentum in that regard. The first was they wanted a bill that would create a regulatory framework for stablecoins at the federal level. So previously, in essence, regulation and licensing of stablecoin issuers was done at the state level, and obviously, states have different rules and regulations, and so President Trump recently did sign a federal stablecoin bill into law. The second thing the industry has wanted for a very long time is what they call a market structure bill, and this was a bill that would solve kind of the decade plus dispute in terms of what is cryptocurrency, right? Is it a security that should be regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, or is it a commodity? And we have a commodity derivatives regulator in the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, but they don't regulate what we call spot markets, meaning people just buying and selling a commodity, for cash. And then along with that, kind of how do you regulate the secondary trading of cryptocurrencies? And so the same week that the House passed and the president signed into law a stablecoin bill, the full House passed a market structure bill that would clarify that the Commodity Futures Trading Commission will be the spot market overseer for cryptocurrency. That has now been sent over to the Senate, and the Senate Banking Committee is looking at that. They'll probably make some tweaks to it. Actually, they've already made some tweaks to it. And I think sort of the timeline on that is hopefully to get it to the president's desk by the end of September. So those are the two big things that just happened on Capitol Hill. Now, look, Jimmy and I have, again, differences of opinion on this. It's true, it was bipartisan. The stablecoin bill in the House had over 100 Democrats vote for it. The market structure bill had like 78 Democrats. And I think the question is, well, why? What makes it so bipartisan? And I would proffer that it is the industry's prolific financing of elections and candidates. I mean, the crypto industry spent over $130 million on various congressional races in the 2024 election cycle. That made them the largest spender by far. They outspent, oil and gas, pharmaceutical, banks, and they were quite successful. Most of the candidates they supported did end up winning their election. So now it's their turn to kind of reap that investment, and they're doing that. So frankly, in my opinion, the crypto industry has sort of bought and paid for our Congress, and they're getting the desired results.
I think that's going that's a bridge too far. I don't think it's quite like that. I would compliment though Congressman French Hill, and Senator Tim Scott. I mean, they have been very involved. Congressman ex-Congressman Patrick McHenry before Congressman French Hill. I mean, both of them they took great pains to learn a lot. I mean, you talk to a lot of politicians, and they know a little bit, but these gentlemen really spent a lot of time learning about the industry, learning about the intricacies of different cryptocurrencies, structures, things like that. I mean, Lee, you and I get to talk to a lot of politicians, and you have to admit, they really have done their homework. In pushing this forward, it wasn't simply something that was, I'm going to parrot something the industry told me. If you talk to them, they can talk in great detail about, the intricacies of cryptocurrencies and things like that. So I really applaud them. I think it goes way beyond the fact that were there huge lobbying efforts? Yes, of course, there were huge lobbying efforts. I think it goes beyond that, though. I think people have done their homework. They've listened to their constituents. I mean, this is a fast-growing asset class. I mean, think how fast it's grown in popularity around not just the U.S., but globally. And so I think that they were reflecting what they're hearing from their constituents.
All right, we got a few minutes left. I want to ask you one last question. 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, whatever, what do you think does this look like? And what do you tell people that fear that volatility or hear stories of people losing out on stuff? What do you think? Lee, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Tim, and I'll caveat my answer by saying that, no matter how I respond, I will probably be wrong, because this crypto industry has evolved in a way that I think no one has predicted. So, I mean, I think no one has a crystal ball here. I will say that this is a sector, an asset class, and it is an asset class that is prone to boom and bust, right? We've seen multiple boom and bust cycles. Obviously, the most recent occurred in the wake of FTX's collapse in 2022, but there's, a collapse, before that in 2017, 2018. So there will be another downturn. And it's just a question of kind of how severe and how widespread will the pain be. I think, one of the upsides of the FTX debacle was that it didn't spill into the traditional financial system, right? It didn't really impact the broader economy. I don't think that's true anymore. I think if you were to see another FTX, and I'm very confident that there will be one, I don't know when, but I think it'll happen within the next 5 years for sure, that you're going to see some, traditional financial institutions, suffer and potentially fail, unless they're bailed out by the government. I think we're at that point where, just like we've seen time and time again with regards to banks, investment banks, you name it, the government will probably step in and prop this sector up for fear of the broader contagion. So, I mean, I think that's really the only thing I can say with certainty. I don't think we're going to see crypto being used for things other than speculation. Obviously, Jimmy will disagree with me on that point, but kind of how does this story end? No one knows.
All right, Jimmy, your turn.
Okay, so as Lee postulated, I am definitely in the other camp. I see it continuing to expand, and when I say expand, I don't just mean more people are going to be holding cryptocurrency. I think that we're going to see digital representations of other kinds of assets. So you hear sometimes people talk about tokenization, tokenizing different types of assets. That is going to come to pass probably in the next year or two. We'll start to see that really come to fruition. We have already tokenized things like bonds. There are a number of companies that have debt, publicly traded debt that has been done in a tokenized fashion. Robinhood just tokenized a couple of private equity offerings in Europe. It's not legal here in the United States to do so. But I can see this exploding. I think the idea of tokenizing more assets, and it's going to give people access to things they don't have access to today. People don't realize sometimes that the number of publicly traded investments has shrunk every year for the past 20 years. If you go back 20 years ago, there were 2.5, 3 times the number of publicly traded stocks on the New York Stock Exchange as there are today. There are now more derivatives than there are underlying assets that are traded. And so what this is going to do, I think we're going to see tokenization of different kinds of assets that will be looked at as long-term investments, more traditional investments, but it'll give more people access to those. In addition, I do see stablecoins growing. I think we're going to see more flavors of stablecoins, similar to what JP Morgan did with tokenized deposits, which actually do allow you to pay interest on them. So I see this exploding. I think if you look 5 years, 10 years down the road, we're going to see more and more of this digital representation being utilized by all kinds of different companies. Are there going to be boom and bust cycles? Absolutely. There are boom and bust cycles in every industry. It happens. It happens with currencies. It happens with the U.S. dollar. It happened with the British pound. We've seen that time and time again. So yes, it's going to be, I think, subject to cyclical moves, just like everything else. But these are proven. They are popular, and I think that people are going to take this and run with it. And I hope that it's led by the United States. I think the new regulation is basically incentivize people in the United States, because we did have companies leaving the U.S. to go elsewhere and do the same thing, but do it in other places. I think we're going to see more people coming back to the United States. I think we will be a center of this kind of innovation, but I see it exploding. I really do.
Well, we'll see. Gentlemen, in the meantime, thank you for expertise and helping our audience kind of understand it better, because it is complicated. So thank you.
Tim, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
If you want to keep up with what's happening in North Carolina politics and hear more conversations with people shaping our state and beyond, check out the Tying It Together YouTube channel in the description. Hit subscribe and let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.